All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Kotler for KJ. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at SafeBreach. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to attend our interactive session today. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and recording will be available on our website, as well as you will receive an email after the webinar. That way you can view it later at your own convenience or share it with anyone else on the team whom you would want to share this with. At any given point of time, if you have any questions about the webinar, the content being discussed here, or anything in general about the SafeBreach platform, please remember to use the Q&A functionality that you can find in Zoom, and we'll answer all the questions after the webinar is completed during the Q&A session. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Everyone joining the webinar obviously works on a security team, and the primary challenge you guys have is that you have to defend the organization, the enterprise, against the evolving threat landscape. And while what that threat landscape is, it changes from day to day. You guys keep track of security metrics, and usually the way it's kept track of, leaving a few fringe situations aside, how many threats are detected, how many are blocked, how many are prevented. While this can be a good, effective way at a certain stage or up to a certain level, this information doesn't necessarily or effectively communicate what impact these threats have on your overall business. It's very difficult to kind of tie the security risk to your business risk without trying to go too deep in the weeds and trying to get lost in all these reports. Now, in today's webinar, we are going to try and identify some of the issues, challenges that plague traditional reporting methods, and how we can potentially overcome them. And additionally, you will hear from a security executive, aka our CISO, to understand their perspective on how tying this business risk along with the security risk can help make key stakeholders, including CISOs, CIOs, board members, security decisions that can influence the business in the long term. So as I mentioned, I'm co-presenting. I'm the Director of Product Marketing. I'm co-presenting this webinar with Shira, who's our Senior Product Manager at SafeBreach, and Avishai, who is our CISO. Again, we're going to try and share how accurate reporting can potentially influence the direction your organization can take, and how it can help you kind of tie the security risk to your business risk to improve your overall security posture. With that being said, these lovely people are presenting, including myself, and I'm not going to go through the agenda. We have just briefly talked about it. But here is the situation briefly. Essentially, this is all Gartner stats. So according to Gartner, by 2026, organizations that implement a continuous threat exposure management program will have 2/3 fewer breaches, which is a staggering stat, because a breach and attack simulation is a key part of continuous threat exposure management. But not only that, they're also stating that by 2026, about 70% of the boards will include a member with cybersecurity experience. And this is critical, because no longer are you having boards which are just made up of decision makers without any sort of technical expertise, but having someone who really understands security, who understands the technical aspect of it, and someone who is able to kind of tie those technical aspects to the overall business risk that are facing the organization. That's key. And this is where Avishai's insight will come in really handy. And so over to you, Avishai.
Thanks, KJ. And and unlike KJ, I don't like to use facts and figures. As KJ mentioned, I'm the SafeBreach CISO. I'm not just the CISO, I'm also a customer of SafeBreach. And I also work with a lot of peer CISOs across different industries. So what I'm going to share with you is some of the experience and learnings that I've had over the years in working on this. And I'm starting with a quote from one of the authors I like, and it says, "A false sense of security is the only kind there is." And I usually like to do my webinars interactive, but it's a little bit difficult with this virtual environment. So by using your reaction capability, raise your hand if you feel your security is adequate, your company's security portfolio is adequate. And I'll pause for a quick second. I don't know if it'll work well or not, but if it doesn't, we'll move on. But the next question is, well, aside from feeling, do you know that your security portfolio is adequate? Which is a very important difference. I mean, there's something about, okay, I have a gut feeling that it's secure versus I know that it's secure. KJ, if you can move to the next slide. Hope is not a strategy. That's a common refrain. I mean, if you don't know for a fact that your security is adequate, you might as well bury your head in the sand. You can't hope that your tools will work the way that they're supposed to when you are under attack. So yes, by 2026, you'll have more board members that are going to be knowledgeable and technical enough. And actually, my personal feeling is that it's going to be somewhat higher than that, and that you'd have more than one member that will challenge you. And so just coming to a board and telling them, hey, I think we're okay, or we feel that we're okay in terms of our security, is not acceptable, or it's not going to be acceptable anymore. So with that, Keji, next. The question is, do you know what you need to know about your information security portfolio? Do you know for a fact that it's configured correctly, that it can withstand the current set of attacks that we see out there in the field, in the environment? And do you know that it's sufficient, that you have the right level of coverage? And so what we tell people is, you can't rely just on the once a year penetration test. That's great. It's very, very solid. It will give you insights, but it's a point in time, once a year test. And so while it gives you very solid results, it doesn't give you continuous results. And it may be only focused on very specific subset. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of organizations, and again, I can't interact with you, so I can't ask. My favorite question is, how many times a year do you do penetration tests? And do you do a penetration test on your entire environment? Or do you just point the third-party penetration testing company at your website and only come in from the internet? Where the reality of it is the malicious actors really can come in from any segment on your environment. They can somehow do an attack takeover through a phishing email or some other vulnerability. They may be able to compromise an employee's laptop when they're out of your company's perimeter, and that employee then brings that compromised laptop into your environment on your corporate LAN. Are you secure then? Do you know what will happen if they will try to attack from that point? Can they do lateral movement? That's something that a penetration test might not reveal. And you can only do that by validating all your security controls from the different environments. And so really, when you think about it, and KJ, if you can move to the next slide, one of the challenges we have is we have a lot on the unknown side, and we need to move it to the known side. And by that, I mean, again, we don't know for a fact, at least I know when I approach security, I cannot make any assumptions or cannot go with just my gut feeling about how secure is my internal environment. Would it withstand lateral movement attempts? Will it be able to handle, basically living off the land type attacks? And what will happen if the attacker actually tries to exfiltrate? I would say, without getting into very specific statistics, most companies don't do any level of egress filtering, which is a problem because it's one of the simplest mechanisms to protect yourself from the impact of a breach. And companies just don't do that. Just, for a quick example is The log4j, I like it because it's an easy example to give. It's just been slightly over a year now when that happened. And basically, the exploit actually had to, it initially started with a malformed query that resulted in the impacted server reaching out with LDAP to download the rest of the malicious payload. The reality of it, if most companies that would have blocked, there's no reason for servers to be going out to the internet with LDAP. If you block that, you could have blocked 99% of the Gen 1 exploits for Log4j just by filtering out traffic that shouldn't be going out. And so, again, you want to validate not just from the outside coming in, but also what can come from the inside going out. Can you go out to C2 servers? Things like that. You want to make sure security controls are adequately set up, because then you know how your security portfolio will behave in real attacks. And I'll turn it back to you, KJ. You're muted.
Thank you so much, Avi. Sorry, I was trying to get off of mute. And that's insightful because it kind of makes sense. Again, you're trying to get away from that whole strategy, and you're trying to find some tangible information in your data to kind of communicate, hey, can I withstand this? Can I withstand this particular attack? And typically, as you are all aware, these are some of the questions that you might get asked. Hey, are we prepared for this particular attack? Can our business be resilient towards this new strain of ransomware? What kind of gaps do we have? Some of this information can be readily available. But then how do you, but there are certain questions in here, as you can see, these have been compiled asking customers, prospects, and then stuff as well, is how do you quantify some of these things? Like, how resilient are we? How are you going to determine that? Like, oh, I can probably stop this ransomware, but not that ransomware. That doesn't really give you an answer, or it doesn't really tell you, can the business withstand certain things? Or if somebody asks you, what is my posture looking like? And what your response is going to be, oh yeah, we are good. But is that going to help someone make a decision? And these are questions that people like Avi, who are the CISOs or the owners of the security program, they get asked constantly from their managers or their bosses, or even the boards, because they want to know, can this business be resilient towards certain levels of attacks or certain kinds of attacks? And it's not just determining or trying to understand the resiliency of the organization or of your security program. They need information like this to actually make business decisions. And so typically, when does a board of directors or CEO get asked, or CIO get asked these kind of questions? Typically when they want to understand what kind of security investments that we need to make. Are you sure that if we put X amount of money in this particular control or these types of controls, these threats are going to be stopped? Or sometimes when you are for example, if something has already happened and you might have to respond to some sort of compliance requirements or some regulation requirements according to your vertical, you might be asked, can I withstand this in the future? Or something has already happened, how do I kind of protect myself again from something like this happening? Or say you're trying to buy a new company, what are you going to do to ensure that the company doesn't open us to some sort of liability or some sort of cyber exposure? And as Avi was mentioning, it's not something put your head in the sand and trying to hope for the best, that, hey, I think we are secure, but let's hope that nothing causes an issue. And this is where, this kind of a joke kind of comes in. Hey, I do track the data, and here it's so that, yeah, your test came back and your kidney numbers are good. And the guy's asking, what does that mean? I was like, yeah, you still have 2 kidneys. This is precisely what you're getting. So with the existing reporting techniques, you get information, but how do you make heads and tails out of it? Are the kidneys functioning as they're supposed to? You don't have that information. And here are some of kind of the shortcomings that we feel we've identified with the existing reporting techniques. The first one is, how do you determine the true impact of these evolving threats on your business bottom line? Because what ends up happening is you might tell someone, hey, this is a gap in our organization, but they don't know how that gap can potentially affect your bottom line, or how it can affect the health of your organization. And then you may or may not be confident in that information. The second challenge or the shortcoming that we feel is that we are, with all the data that you have, you're unable to really communicate the true resilience of your organization. You might tell them, hey, we can stop this vulnerability or we can stop that. But when you start looking at things on a much holistic level, it might be difficult to communicate that information without going too much into the weeds. The third challenge that we have is probably identified is, or a shortcoming is that, how do you accurately determine a baseline? Like, what is it that you're comparing yourself against? Are you trying to compare yourself against some other organization? Are you trying to compare yourself against 6 months ago, or on a case-by-case basis? How do you measure progress? How do you ensure that you have grown in your security posture, and not even, or how do you track that effectively? That's kind of the key question. And then lastly, you might be able to find gaps here and there, but how do you actually determine the real return on investment on your security investments? Are you sure that any of your deployed controls, while you might have gaps in them, you might be able to find out those gaps, but are they really affecting my overall posture? How do you actually quantify that? And to answer some of those questions, I want to kind of turn it over to Shira, who's going to share a little insight on how we at SafeBreach perceive how we can try to solve these challenges for you. Over to you, Shira.
Great, thanks, KJ. Yeah, so basically, kind of as KJ mentioned, the way that reporting is done today often lacks a lot of context for some of the board of director members or other stakeholders that don't necessarily understand exactly what the numbers might mean unless you really hand it over to them in a way that makes sense. And that's why, kind of as we were approaching this question and trying to understand how we would want to solve this matter from our own perspective within the SafeBreach platform, there were a few kind of drivers that were guiding us as we tried to understand how we would be able to help our customers take this information and really connect it to the business risk, connect it to insights that these stakeholders can truly understand and can truly use in making decisions. So first of all, the first driver, as we already discussed a little bit, is the ability to quantify. We want to provide numbers that can easily be tracked. So a simple score, something that you don't need to understand too much going into exactly how it was done and what are the particular details that made up this particular score. We want to provide one clear way of measuring that can be tracked over time and that can easily be communicated. Additionally, it was really important for us to kind of find a way to surface to the top any performance gaps, make it very evident where you would want to improve, and then help you track that improvement over time again. And the third driver that I would mention is the fact that, again, once you find and you identify those gaps, obviously the main thing you want to do is to remediate them. You want to make sure that you have a set of gaps that you might have identified. You want to make sure that your remediation efforts are channeled into the right places, and that you're making sure to remediate the places that truly move the needle and truly make an impact on improving your security program for the better. And the last driver is something that we hold very dear to our heart here at SafeBreach, is the fact that it's continuous. So we're constantly checking, we're constantly tracking, we're constantly making sure to give the most accurate picture to the stakeholders, so that they can also know that the information that we're providing for them is information that's true to the most recent test. It's not something, as Avi mentioned, that happened 3 months ago and lots of configurations might have changed since then. We're talking about something that is relevant and contextual, given the assessments that were run in the environment recently, yesterday, this week, etc. So these were all things that kind of guided us as we approached this question of how do you quantify your risk and how do you connect it to the business side of things. Yeah, so that's kind of where we came up with our security posture optimizer, which is actually our new homepage within the SafeBreach application. And this is really a kind of dashboard that provides a high-level snapshot of how your organization is doing in terms of its security posture. As I mentioned, we've got our single score that can really provide the first indication of where you are, especially as you track it over time. And this dashboard really kind of provides a single pane of glass for our customers to kind of see across their environment, across the various vectors that they're employing as they run tests in their environment using SafeBreach. So to really see how they're doing on each of those different fronts, continuously measure their improvement on each of those different fronts, and make sure that they're improving their security posture over time. So just kind of, as specific bullet points. So we're talking about the ability to quantify the posture. Again, that's done with the score, with the percentages, the breakdowns that we'll go over in just a moment when I kind of demo this dashboard. The ability to track and identify gaps. So finding where you're doing better, where you're not doing so great, and you want to make sure that you're remediating and closing those gaps, and then making sure after you run again that those gaps are indeed getting better, the gaps are closing, your posture is improving, and making sure that your remediation efforts that you're not overwhelmed by the amount of remediation information, and you're not overwhelmed by the gaps in a way that doesn't allow you to remediate in an effective way. So these are all things that we kind of brought together as part of the security posture optimizer. So yeah, I'd be happy to demo that for you. Just a moment, I will share my screen. So this is our security posture optimizer. As you can see, we start out with the score. I'll kind of break it down a little bit just to kind of help everyone understand a little bit what we're looking at. But basically, this is our snapshot of what's going on in the environment, the security posture. It's based on a set of tests. So the default is the tests run in the past month, but this is something that can be customized. You can select, add tests, remove tests, etc., so that this dashboard can really represent any kind of campaign or effort that you have going on within your environment. So for example, if we want to take an example of a company that wants to put an effort on kind of checking how vulnerable they are to email attacks, right? So they want to make sure that they're protected from any kind of phishing efforts or additional email attacks that try to infiltrate their network. So that organization can run a variety of different tests that use different email attacks within the SafeBreach platform, different types of attacks. Each one has, each attack represents a bit of a different method, different indicators, different payloads, etc. And you can really select only those particular tests to really represent that effort. And once you select those tests, you can see the snapshot being calculated based on that information specifically. So once you kind of have that information in place, how do you read it? So we have the score, as we mentioned. This is a score that's calculated based on the percent of simulations that were included in those tests that we're looking at that were blocked. This includes both simulations that were blocked with specific logs from security controls backing up the prevention, or maybe it was blocked from our perspective, from the SafeBreach perspective. We know that the attacks weren't able to be carried out to completion. And it also has a component in the score that references security controls that detected the simulations, even if they didn't prevent them. So it's really possible to drill in to the various types of results. Obviously, by default, we know that our customers usually like to focus, first of all, on simulations that were not blocked. So this little red sliver over here represents the simulations that weren't blocked. And they really want to focus here because this is where they need to focus their efforts. So the way that we would read this is that for each of these different security controls or vectors, depending on how you want to view them, there are attack vectors that represent certain security controls that protect each of those different fronts. So they can kind of see the breakdown of how they're doing on that for that particular attack vector. So we can see that for cloud, for example, 53% of the simulations that are mapped as cloud simulations were not blocked. And this is something that's very valuable for me to be able to say, okay, so I know that I'm not doing so well right now with my cloud security stack. Maybe I have a cloud security control in place, and it's a matter of fixing my configurations, making them less permissive, making sure that I'm checking, that I'm changing all of my rules accordingly. And once I do that, I can of course rerun and hopefully see this number drop.
And if
see
I
a
can,
smaller percentage. Yeah.
if I can add here, this is one of the important capabilities as well, is that you don't have to rely on a third-party company to do a retest. You can rerun the same test over and over until you get it right whenever you are ready to do the test. You don't have to set up a timeline for your, with a third-party company. You own the test and you can run it again and again and again until you are sure you have the maximum optimal coverage. And if there's still gaps, now you can start saying, okay, let me look for the technology or the control that will help me address it.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that of course we provide all kinds of tests out of the box that you can use and leverage as templates, or you can create your own. Of course, we provide full flexibility around that to really allow you to test exactly what you're looking to test. But back to the posture optimizer, I just kind of wanted to highlight the fact that here, this view, it has a lot of information, but it's also remaining kind of high level. So this is something that we really see as something that can be shared with stakeholders that are more high level, that don't necessarily, they're not necessarily in the weeds of exactly how the security program is set up and exactly what controls are sitting where and exactly what kind of rules and configurations they have. But this is something that can really be shared with them, that in a clear and concise way says, this is how we're doing overall for this particular effort. For example, if we're looking at this email validation effort that we're trying to carry out, this is how we're doing overall. We can say, this is the number that we had last week, and see an improvement. We can say, as you can see, we're doing not so great with cloud, better with other kinds of vectors, etc. So this is kind of part of the way that we approached the creation of this snapshot, this dashboard, was the fact that we wanted to be able to provide several different granularities. So this is kind of a high level view that allows you to see kind of in high level how you're doing and what the breakdown is in terms of the different controls, given that you're testing a variety of different vectors. And if necessary, of course, it's also possible to drill down and see those nitty-gritty details and exactly, get the raw logs directly from the control to understand exactly what happened and whether it was quarantined or whether it wasn't, and what rule it was correlated from. So we really provide a lot of flexibility in terms of what kind of view you want to provide based on the different kind of role that you play within your organization. So as I mentioned, you can focus on what is not being blocked and what you want to remediate. On the other hand, you can also focus on the things that are being blocked and say, okay, so I know I'm doing a good job with these particular vectors. If we're going to take our email example, we can focus here on our email. And if we want to see a little bit how that drill down works, if we do want to drill down a little bit deeper, we can click here on the email. We can see that 82% of the simulations that are mapped as email simulations were stopped. They were blocked in some capacity. I'll note that we make a distinction between simulations that were just stopped, meaning that we know that they were blocked, but we don't necessarily have prevention logs or prevention evidence directly from the security control. And there are also, so there were 82% that were blocked, 1% that was stopped. So that means there was 81% that were prevented, that are 81% of the simulations, the email simulations, we know that they didn't succeed in completing. And we have a relevant log from the security control that we can correlate directly to the simulation and say, our simulation triggered this prevention in the control. In this case, we can see that it's Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Office 365. These are the controls that prevented these email attacks that we tried running within our environment. And I can also click in and really get sent directly to the specific simulations. I can see exactly which ones. And as I mentioned, I can also see the exact log directly from the control, from Defender for O365. This is the raw log that we fetched directly from there. And we can see that it was blocked. We got a blocked quarantine log. And we know that this is something that was triggered as a result of this particular simulation that we ran. So that's kind of one example of the way that you can drill in. And it kind of demonstrates the way that you can choose the different level of granularity that you want to display. One last thing that I wanted to mention is that in order to kind of close the loop, so of course, you carry out your analysis, you understand, where you're doing better, where you want to focus your efforts, but we also want to allow our customers and our users to close that loop on the remediation side. So this is something that we actually don't have right now, but it's going to be released in the upcoming version, is the ability to navigate directly from here into our insight summary report. So it'll basically allow, based on that same filtering of tests. So again, if we're talking about our email effort and we have our set of email related tests, I'd be able to navigate directly here to our insight summary report for those same tests, for that same subset of simulations. And this report really provides very specific remediation suggestions. So this is something that can be shared with the remediation team in a very, very clear way. We have very clear, concise recommendations of exactly what needs to be done, as well as the exact indicators that need to be used during that remediation process, the remediation data. So it was really important for us also to kind of close that loop in terms of both showing the breakdown, showing the overview, and also allowing you to access easily the remediation suggestions such that you can know what you should do about those insights that you were able to extract from the dashboard. I'll take this opportunity to just mention that there are a bunch of different kinds of reports that SafeBreach provides out of the box, and they each give a different view. So this report is focused specifically on how you would want to remediate given the findings that you have from your environment and from the tests that were run. But there are also reports that focus specifically on MITRE, for example, or on specific threats, imminent threats, latest US CERT alerts, things like that. So it really depends on which angle you are approaching your or the use case that you're interested in, as well as the type of report that you would want to communicate onto the board of directors, to your CISO, to any other stakeholders. And aside from these reports, which are supposed to be kind of more high level, something that you can share with executives, we also have dashboards, which are interactive reports. So they're very flexible. You can create them, customize them, build out widgets, remove widgets, organize it however you want. But this is also a really powerful tool, both for reporting, but also for analysis. So these dashboards are interactive, and if you find a specific subset of simulations that was not blocked, for example, you can drill in and see exactly which simulations they were, as well as exporting them to share with your remediation team. So the dashboards are kind of a more operational way. And again, this ties back to the same issue that I mentioned before, that depending on your role, you're going to want a different level of granularity as you look at the results. And you're also going to want a different level of granularity as you consume your reports. So, board of directors and stakeholders are going to want something that's more high level, something that provides more kind of business-oriented insights, whereas the operational teams and the remediation teams would want to be able to drill in to understand exactly what succeeded, what didn't succeed, why, the reasons, as well as, of course, getting those indicators in order to be able to remediate, rerun, retest, and remeasure. So that was a bit about the Security Posture Optimizer, and I'll hand it back over to you, KJ.
I should get myself off mute. Thank you again, Shira. And as Shira was, kind of covering all of this, our entire goal of this Security Posture Optimizer and our wider array of executive reporting is to make security posture much more clear and concise for everybody. I'm not going to go through the list. You'll see it in the presentation as well and in the video. But essentially, for security practitioners, instead of spending too much time delving down into deep weeds when we're trying to communicate something, it's easy to get that initial information, and you can pass that on. That can help your executives and your board of directors make informed decisions. Yeah, and if you want in the weeds reports that can help you optimize your remediation efforts and identify gaps, by all means, we also provide you that information. But if you're executive or your board of directors, you just need to understand, am I able to withstand this level of attack? And we are providing you with that ability that, hey, you can make a decision based on the information that you're getting without trying to understand, hey, X amount was prevented, X amount was detected. They don't care about that. They just need to know, are we good? Are we not good? If we're not good, how can we get better? Because think about it from their perspective when they're trying to understand if their company is compliant or if their company is correctly adhering to, say, cyber insurance regulations or some sort of government-sponsored regulations. Are we effectively handling that issue? And so that has been the entire goal of the Posture Optimizer, to kind of try and make security posture much more clear, concise, and easy to understand for all your stakeholders, right from your security practitioners all the way to your executives and your board of directors. With that being said, we are in our Q&A section right now, and we do have a question that we received. But before that, I just want to remind everyone, all the attendees, please take the time to, if you do have any questions, use the Q&A function to submit your questions. Myself, Avi, and Shira will answer those questions now. So, Avi, I'm going to read the question.
Let me take that. This is a question from, I see, regarding the customers replacing their penetration test with SafeBreach. So I'll start by saying it's not something we recommend. That said, I know of at least one customer that absolutely did that. They essentially replaced their annual penetration testing budget, and they used it to purchase SafeBreach. Now, the reason I don't necessarily recommend it is because, look, there's nothing that's going to replace, for now, hopefully in terms of job security, nothing will replace the human ingenuity and ability to really respond and react to what they see. We've built a lot of that intelligence and that capability into our product, but we do not replace the person. But that person and that skill is something that you pay a lot for. And so we do see SafeBreach really supplementing penetration testing and really being used to, if anything, as a force multiplier for red teams, because a red team can basically create a new attack that is relevant to the organization and then use the SafeBreach platform to execute it at scale.
Another thing that I do want to add is a lot of our customers, while they don't exactly use us to replace pen testing, as Avi was saying, they use us to identify their vulnerable spots. And if the same spots continue to be vulnerable over time, then you can focus your pen testing efforts, your red teaming efforts on that particular area. So with SafeBreach, you can potentially identify your weak spots that then you can target with further specific testing. But again, we are not here to replace pen testing. We can help you identify those weak spots, all the while continuously validating that if there are any gaps and if those gaps are claimed to be fixed, can they withstand the next new attack that we continuously keep on. We do have another question
I just
here.
want to also note that keep in mind that technically, if you go by what the recommendation is, that this is a third-party penetration test, the answer is, SafeBreach is a third party. The attacks that we run are real attacks. And so technically you do satisfy that requirement. But again, it's one of those where I would really recommend that you still keep penetration tests for a specific environment that you're concerned about, and really supplement that with SafeBreach to validate the rest of your security controls.
Sabi? Next question is, I think also probably you can answer it. Given gaining popularity of cyber insurance and compliance regulations, do you feel that accurately tracking posture can help achieve insurance and compliance objectives?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for those of you who deal with cybersecurity insurance, you may have responded to those questionnaires where they ask you, do you have a firewall? Do you have an awareness program? Do you have an IPS? And you check off the list, but the reality of it, they don't really know whether or not it's effective. We have one customer that actually came to me and thanked me because they were able to show, by showing that they're using SafeBreach to validate the security controls, that they're effective. They were able to get, they mentioned something like 16% discount on their cyber insurance premium, which translates to something over $200K for that particular company. So I think that cyber insurance companies, sooner rather than later, are going to require you to do something along the lines of proving that your security program is working. So better beat them to the punch and make sure that you're not all of a sudden in a pressure to create that validation in order to get your insurance to be effective.
Thank you, Avi. And we have time for one last question. I think, Shira, you might be best suited to answer this. What are some of the recommended best practices while using the posture optimizer? Are there any?
So I'd say this really ties back to the fact that we have various roles that use the platform. So again, it really depends on what your use case is and what the level of granularity of the results that you're looking for. But I would always recommend starting with understanding where your biggest gaps lie and using that as kind of a jumping off point for identifying where you want to remediate, just because from my experience, usually that's the way to make the biggest impact in moving the needle and improving your posture, raising those numbers, raising your score. Usually that's something that's done by, first of all, making sure that you're not vulnerable, closing those gaps, and then you can, there's always room for improvement in terms of, improving those configurations and optimizing them and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks.
Thank you again so much, Shira and Avi. And thank you to all our attendees for taking the time and, listening to how we can actually help you optimize your security posture. So as I mentioned again, this webinar is being recorded and you will get a recording link after the webinar is over. And the recording will also be available on our website. So again, from all of us here at SafeBreach, thank you again and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.